Most people do not see God at work in their personal lives and therefore do not know how to join Him. This Divine Appointments podcast is to encourage you in your faith, to open your eyes to seeing God's hand at work. My hope and prayer is that by hearing these stories, you too will engage where God is already working and discover God's mission for your life. Well, hello. I have a very special guest today, my husband, Joel. This is a conversation with my husband. I thought it was very fitting because I'm launching a new podcast, an audio podcast from videos that I've been doing. And I thought it was appropriate for him to help me explain the name of the podcast, which is Divine Appointments. So we're going to have a little discussion about divine appointments in our lives and how we've seen God at work and how we came to this point. So first I want to read Psalm 105 verses 1 through 5, and that is really the theme verses for my podcasts and videos, and that is Psalm 105 verse 1. Give thanks to the Lord, call on His name, make known His accomplishments among the nations. Sing to Him, make music to Him, tell about His miraculous deeds, boast about His holy name. Let the hearts of those who seek the Lord rejoice. Seek the Lord in the strength He gives. Seek His presence continually. Recall the miraculous deeds He performed, His mighty acts, and the judgments He decreed. So this has been a journey of doing videos, and when I thought that I was being silly and crazy to even do this, Joel was always my encourager, and he said, "You're just letting people tell their stories," and that's really what all these videos have been.
She's softening this too much. I'm going to have to jump in there. She's riding on the elliptical bike early in the mornings. I'm in my office working. This is right after we get up, and she calls me in there. This happens over and over and over again before the first video. She calls me in there. She goes, "I just really feel like God is telling me to listen to this story, or listen to this person I ran into this week, or this reminds me of a conversation I had 3 months ago." And she was telling me all this, but then she would always hesitate and say, "No, I don't want to sound preachy." That's what you said. I don't want to sound preachy, or like I'm preaching at everybody, at someone,
right? Or
that I'm, wagging my finger at them or something. And that was the hesitation. And my only encouragement was, these are really, really cool stories where God's at work. Why wouldn't you share them? So
right.
that was my only encouragement.
Then we got some help with the videos, and then transferring them to be an audio podcast called Divine Appointments. And I had to come up with a name, and it just became so clear to me that it was Divine Appointments, because a lot of our testimony is how God has stepped into our lives, and we could see with His definite hand at work in our lives, and appointed times. Part of the Bible study that we did years ago was to look at the Hebrew word moed, which means appointed time. And the first time you see it in the Bible is Genesis 1:14. And that's where God says, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them be signs to indicate seasons and days and years." And the word seasons there comes, we looked up in the Blue Letter Bible, that word is moed, which is appointed place, appointed time, meeting, a sacred season or feast, or appointed season, appointed signal or sign, or tent of meeting. And this is the first place that it's used in the Bible, is where God was creating in His sovereignty the seasons that govern our time. But there are other places where the actual tent of meeting in the Old Testament, the actual tent where God would dwell, the tabernacle was the same word, moed.
Moed. Yes, it's really fascinating. So basically, in the story of creation, Genesis chapter 1, you've got God creating all things, but creating the sun, the moon, and the stars. And He's telling you that I'm creating these, but they're not just heavenly beings, they're not just planets and stars. they're also markers that set times, and they set moeds, appointed times. And if you follow the Jewishness of the Old Testament, you realize that's what God was doing. He was setting up appointed times that they would mark using the sun and the moon. And there were the things that we know today as the Jewish festivals, Rosh Hashanah, Day of Atonement, these various festivals. And they were appointed times that the Jewish people were to stop, to pause, and meet with God. It was a meeting time, but not just any meeting time. It was a meeting time to meet with God. And then like you're saying there, which you were just bringing up, then you had the temple, not the temple, but the tabernacle through the wilderness that Moses and the children of Israel carried around with them for 40 years. And that was the moed. It was the appointed place.
And then we were talking about in John chapter 1, Jesus, it says about Jesus, the word became flesh and dwelt or tabernacled among us.
Mm-hmm.
And really, you were mentioning that Jesus enters our...
Well, what was the tabernacle? The tabernacle had the Holy of Holies, and it was the place that Yahweh God would physically come down and interact with Moses. The Holy of Holies was the place within the temple, tabernacle, later the temple. It was where the Ark of the Covenant was. It was where Yahweh God would meet, and he would meet face to face with Moses. And this is what's so beautiful about your New Testament. Your New Testament takes that same imagery, but there is no temple. There isn't a temple any longer, and there is no tabernacle.
What does he say?
Your New Testament says you are the temple of God. So an easy way to look at it is, if we are now the temple of God, what does that mean? What was the temple of God? The temple of God had a most holy place, the Holy of Holies. Well, that's our heart. We are now the temple of God. The Holy of Holies is within us, and Jesus Christ tabernacles with us there. So the moed, the place, the appointed time or the appointed place, the tabernacle now is in the heart of the believer. So when you are in an appointment with another person, Jesus Christ is there. It is an appointed time, and you are literally in the presence of God because he's in you. We are the tabernacle. We are the temple, and Christ is in you. So it's a beautiful picture.
When you interact with others, it might be a
appointed
divine
time.
appointment that God has orchestrated. And it gives you also the idea of God's sovereignty. One of our favorite scripture verses that we teach is Isaiah 46:9-10. Remember the former things, those of long ago. I am God and there is no other. I am God and there is none like me. I make known the end from the beginning, from ancient times, what is yet to come. I say, my purpose will stand and I will do all that I please. So God is sovereign. He will accomplish all that he pleases. It's just whether or not we will partner with him.
Absolutely. And he sets up the divine appointments. He knows what their end result will be, and he knows what the entire result will be of the divine appointment. He knows that, whether you ever know it or not. But tell the story of Ishmael, because one of your first podcasts, very first video was a divine appointment. And it's interesting because God doesn't always give you the glimpse of what the divine appointment was. But in this case, he did.
That's right. So Ishmael Harley was my first video to do, where I really felt like God was telling me that I had to be obedient because I felt so strongly.
Tell the story.
Tell his story. So I'll tell briefly, but do go and watch it. It's on YouTube. Ishmael Harley. So he grew up in an apartment complex in South Jackson, and ministers came and shared the gospel with him and with all kids around him. And he came to know the Lord, and soon they became a whole church out of that group. And
apartment complex.
And it became City Church, and we became involved in it as a family and got to know Ishmael. And then eventually,
how old was Ishmael about this time? About 21, 22?
Mm-hmm.
Something like that.
And then eventually we found out that his mother told us that I had delivered Ishmael 23 years before, when I was a resident in training. And that was like so such a strong lightning bolt to me that I had a divine appointment, that I was there for a reason, that he was there for a reason. And it's just amazing for God to put his stamp on that.
Okay, if you step back and you think we're trapped in our time domain, we're trapped to where we can only see time at a point in time and linearly, and we can only look backwards at the past. That's where we're trapped. God's not trapped there. So you can kind of stop and imagine. There was a day 23, 24 years ago at the University of Mississippi Medical Center at the Weiser Women's Hospital. I was assuming at that time. At the Weiser Women's Hospital there on Woodrow Wilson, you were in a room and you delivered a baby named Ishmael. And it just, if you could stop for just a second and take it from God's perspective, at that very moment, he knew 23 years later the impact Ishmael would have on our family and you would have on him. And he knew that when you were birthing the baby 23 years earlier. That's a divine appointment that God just so happened to say, hey, check this out. I'll show you this divine appointment. But the other thing to remember is 90% of the time you never know that. You've had a divine appointment. You've had a divine appointment. You've had a divine interaction with someone, and you're never shown the ripple effect or the consequences, and you may not ever see it until you're on the other side, until we're in eternity.
So what does that do to you?
It makes you sensitive of those divine appointments. Be looking for them, whether God gives you the end of the divine appointment or not. They're happening constantly. As a matter of fact, most of the time you don't get to see the end of it.
Right. It makes me more aware of looking for spiritual conversations with people, looking for where God might be working and recognizing. Just being able to recognize it.
Joining God where he's already working.
Yes.
And being aware that that's what's going on.
And we've had some divine appointments in our lives, right? Mm-hmm. Good and bad. I think you can have bad divine appointments, things that happen to you for a reason that prepare you to do battle.
Yes. The Christian walk is not always, bubble gum and candy. Sunshine and roses. No, it's not.
Rainbows and...
Matter of fact, when I look at my own life, by far my most spiritual growth is birthed out of struggle and pain. You hate to say that. You hate to admit it. We'd all like to say, oh, God always makes everything wonderful and smooth. That's a lie. First of all, you hadn't read your Bible. Right. Paul had a tough life.
Yeah.
All the disciples were all but John was ultimately murdered, go on and on and on. Mm-hmm. So how people get caught up in that whole health and wealth gospel, I don't understand, because it is not biblical. But anyway, but just looking at your own life, I have grown by far more out of pain and suffering and doubt and worry. Not that those are good things, but out of that, I've grown more than out of good times and easiness. It's just the way it is. Because typically you don't think you need God until you need God.
So we can see just in our lives how God has worked things out and put us places physically and situationally, spiritually, that have made us grow and grow closer to him, and he's worked in our lives tremendously.
Did you want to point out a few of those divine appointments?
I told him
Ishmael was one.
Ishmael was a good appointment, a good divine appointment. And so much of our trials, I guess, and difficult times were good times, like the birth of our first son very prematurely was a divine appointment. Because of his experience, we could share and help others and understand others. Joel's fall off the roof and his traumatic brain injury from that was a bad divine appointment, but very much part of the testimony of what God, our story of how God's worked through that difficult time, I would say.
Without getting into any detail at all. Well, for me, but I look back at that and what I guess you would classify as the worst time of my life, that injury and the subsequent or the following recovery and all that kind of stuff, what it did to me over a long period of time spiritually, and I guess God, best way I could say it is molding, chipping away like a clay, molding my personality was a direct result of that injury. And no, I wouldn't want it to happen again. I'd love to have my hearing back in that ear. But I also wouldn't trade the maturity that it brought over a long period of time. Not instantly. I was mad. but yeah, that's what comes out, I think, times like that. Divine appointment.
Divine appointments.
Yeah, I mean, that day I fell off the roof. It's weird to think this, but God knew it. I woke up that morning, I was going to go for a run and then go to my office. I work from the home sometime. I have an office away from the home. That day I was going to go for a quick run, do my exercise, which I hate doing, and then go to work. And that day, everything changed. God knew it. God knew it. I didn't, but he did. And so it was an appointed time for me to go through that. And that's just my little example. I think about just in the news this week, some of the tragedies that's happened. God sits outside of time and knows these things, and these divine appointments are there for a reason. Anyway.
Absolutely.
I'm probably off subject.
That's okay. We'll wrap up. So the Divine Appointments podcast is now on a lot of platforms, and we hope that you like and subscribe and share. Hope that it will be a ministry to you and encourage patience. I say patience because that's how it was birthed. It was birthed for me as a physician. Joel always says I just sit around and talk to women all day.
Sit around chatting with women all day.
But I get a unique perspective talking to ladies all day about what's going on in the world, in their personal lives and their families, and the struggles that they have. And especially during the pandemic, there was so much anxiety and uncertainty and depression and brokenness, and I recognized that there were also times that God was working in people's lives, and ministries and people that were struggling, that were seeking the Lord and seeing his hand at work. And I wanted to share this. I'm like, everyone needs to hear this. And that's really how this podcast came about. So my desire would be that somebody might hear something that sounded familiar and encourage them. They would hear how God is working. They would see that God is real and true and active, and his word is sharper than a two-edged sword, and that we can cling to that. We can see God's hand at work.
But based on what you've told me before, not just see it,
but also
engage and join it.
Right.
That's you've told me your heart many times about this, that the more you see God at work and you recognize these divine appointments and you see it, you train yourself to see it, it encourages you to take part in it.
It gives you confidence to step out in faith, to step out in obedience, which is why we're doing this.
Yeah, I think about just the last 4 or 5 videos that you've had, and you look at each one of those people, and that's what they are. That's the story. The story is look at how this person engaged. They're no different than you and me and everybody else. They're no more trained. They're no more spiritual. They're no more godly or anything like that. They're just people who engaging and have divine appointments, and God's using them.
They're people allowing God to work through them, which is what the Great Commission is all about.
Yep. As you are going, disciple. Your commandment is to go and disciple.
Go and disciple.
That's it.
Thank you. Thanks so much for watching this episode. Now you engage where God is at work. Please make sure to like and subscribe so you will be notified of future episodes.